Hello, welcome to Woven Minis. Today I'm going to be showing you how I've painted these Abomination miniatures for Heroquest, and you'll notice that they're not the same as the ones in the box. If you're familiar with my previous Heroquest videos, you'll know that I'm on a bit of a mission to replace the contents of the box with other miniatures that I prefer. Most of these are being 3D printed, which is good because it gives me control over how big they are so they can fit on the board nicely. And these are the ones I picked to replace the fishhead Abominations. Clearly, when they remade the Heroquest box, they wanted to avoid any kind of lawsuit related to Fimir, so they decided to copy the Sahuagin from D&D instead, which is fair enough. These look really cool. I like the models a lot, and I gave them a nice simple colour scheme, which is really quick and easy to do. So I'll show you how I did that. Let's dive straight into it. I got the STLs from myminifactory.com for these Sahuagin miniatures, and the pronunciation of Sahuagin, you can Google it if you want. Some people say Haugen, Sahu, it sounds like John Fashanu who had gladiators. Sahuagin, or Sahaugen, or Swagen, you know, I think it's Sahuagin. But anyway, that's what I'm going to go with. If you want to correct me in the comments, feel free, and maybe I'll pronounce it differently in the future. Who knows? Anyway, fish heads. The miniatures come in essentially 3 parts. Some of them are 2 parts, but you've got the combined body, arms, legs, and head, and then you've got the separate hands. So some of them have got double-handed weapons that you can fit between 2 of the wrist joints. Some of them have got individual hands that you put on, and it's a really nice, easy way to put them together. The way that the STLs are being designed, you've got these nice little ball and socket joints on the wrists. They've got little bracelets that kind of cover the join. Didn't need to pin them or anything because you've got a really good connection point in that ball and socket joint, so just a bit of super glue and it goes in nicely. It's good. I think you've got a bit of choice, you know, because it doesn't really matter in Heroquest. It doesn't matter what they're armed with, so you can mix and match and do what you like. And I just did what I thought looked pretty cool. I printed these out on my Elegoo Mars 3 Pro, which is a great printer, really affordable, and works really well. They came out very nicely, went together very easily, and because they've got those nice big splayed toes, they actually stick on the bases very easy. I thought I was going to have to do quite a bit of pinning, but I didn't in the end. Now the only issue I've had is those tridents, which are very spindly. I've been using the regular resin from Elegoo, which is UV cured resin, and it's fairly brittle. It's the version 2 of their standard grey resin, which works absolutely fine, really good detail, and I'm pleased with it. The only problem here is it's fairly brittle, and I did find myself, I broke one of the tridents, so I've ended up turning it into a man catcher because I'd already started painting it. Actually broke it twice, broke the whole head off the trident, so then I pinned it into place, cutting off some of the shaft so it was a bit shorter, and then I managed to somehow break the little prong off in the middle, which is why it's now a man catcher. I think it looks fine as it is, but it was a little bit annoying. I would have rather it stayed as a trident, but you know, that's life. I am going to look at some of the alternative resins in a future video and have a little comparison side by side, because there are ABS-like resins which are a little bit more flexible, and although this whole sort of project that I've been doing is to avoid having these super flexible models, maybe a little bit of flexibility would have helped. In this case it would have been less brittle, but I'm happy enough with how I've fixed the model in this case, and the models do look really good, so I'll just get them painted, and you know, if I need to reprint one in the future and paint it again, then so be it. That's no big deal. You've got the files there forever, so you can print out as many as you want, which is quite a nice thing with 3D printing. So I'm painting these with a fairly simple method, a kind of modified Slapchop, which is something that I've used in some of my other videos before. It's not the only way I paint things, but I do find for models like this, to get them ready for a kind of tabletop standard quickly, it works very well. Spray paint them black, and then do a zenithal spray of Wraithbone in this case, but something lighter. It doesn't have to be Wraithbone, but something lighter. And you do that lightly, so you end up with a bit of shading kind of already pre-built into the model, and that gives you a really good base to start from. It's all about building up areas of deeper shadows and highlights and all that kind of stuff. Doing that in the quickest way, easiest way possible. You'll see some people on YouTube using dry brushing to get a similar sort of effect. I personally find that the spray painting is an easy method, works for me, really nice and quick, but find whatever works for you. And if you don't like Slapchop and you want to spend longer over your models and, you know, do edge highlighting or whatever, you know, then great, crack on. I mean, it's all whatever you want to do with your hobby. This is just the method that I've used for these models that works for me. As I've said, I use other methods with other models, it just depends. But with the sort of scaly amphibious skin of these particular Sahuagin models, I think that this works pretty well. You know, it really brings out the musculature of their bodies and, you know, the sort of spiny bits and all that kind of stuff. I think it looks pretty cool. So I used this Cruxagor scale turquoise paint for the main body. I didn't want to make them green because I've already got the green skinned orcs and goblins. Wanted to make sure they were distinct from those. I didn't want to go full blue, didn't quite feel right, so turquoise makes sense. They kind of look like skinks or something to me, you know, it's that kind of vibe. When using contrast paints or speed paints or inks or whatever you might be using, I think it's the same basic rules tend to apply. Thinning it down tends to be a good thing to do. You know, not always, but for a lot of things. So with these, I've put it onto a wet palette, thinned it down with a little bit of contrast medium. You can use a little bit of water to thin contrast paints as well. It does work, but you don't want to put too much water in them because it kind of affects how the contrast paints flow. But anyway, I used contrast medium here to thin it down a bit and just carefully paint it over the whole body. You do need to be a bit careful with not overpainting too much when you're using this kind of slap-choppy contrast type method, because it's a little bit difficult to correct later. Some of the contrast paints work really well in terms of going over other contrast paints. So some of them have got a high degree of pigmentation in them and they're quite opaque, so you could get away with putting the more opaque ones over the top of other contrast paints. But with some of them you really want to have that sort of nice wraithbone base that you've already got. So if you do go over a bit that you don't intend to be this turquoise colour, you might need to tidy up with a wraithbone paint from the brush before you then go to the next stage. It depends, it really depends which paint you're using. So try to be as neat as you can. It's kind of like a weird sort of method of, in one way you're slapping it on, and in another way you've got to be quite careful and neat. So, you know, it's still quick, and you only really need the one coat of it, I find. You know, it's some bits of some models I put on multiple coats to really get some extra depth in there, but for these ones it was the one coat of the Cruxagor scale, and they looked pretty cool, I thought. So although I'm batch painting these guys, I kind of did the main scaly bits on a few of them first, and then tried the next stage of painting because I was trying to work out the colour scheme as I went along, really. I had a vague idea, but no clear plan in mind. I also used up all of the Cruxagor scale paint that was on my wet palette, so I thought, well, I'll move on to the next colour. And I used Bile Red, which is another contrast paint. Now this is a really vibrant red. I like it a lot, but it doesn't seem to have quite the same behaviour as some of the other contrast paints because it's got a lot of pigment in it. It's very bright, very opaque. It doesn't quite get the same shading and highlighting as some of the other ones do, which is not a big problem here because I'm happy with the results. It's just something to be aware of, that not all the contrast paints behave in the same way, and from what I understand, the same is true of speed paints. Some of them behave differently. So just bear that in mind when you're using them, that sometimes some of them are more opaque, some of them less opaque, some of them behave slightly differently. Now this one, I really like the vibrancy of the red, and I think it contrasts well with the turquoise. I was debating around using purple for the crests or yellow. I was also debating around varying the crest colours on the different abominations. But when I did this red and I thought it looked so good next to the turquoise, I decided to keep them all consistent You've got different sculpts. Each abomination looks unique because of what they're carrying and their poses. I didn't want to start messing about too much, making them all different colours and going crazy with it. Certainly, it's a possibility. Could have done all of them in different colours. Could have looked like a bunch of poison dart frogs nipping around the table, which would be great. But for what I wanted to have a bit more grounded consistency, I suppose. And it's supposed to be nice and obvious because I'm playing Heroquest with my daughter and a couple other kids. You want to be able to easily say, that's an orc, that's a goblin, those are abominations. Very obvious what's what, because when you're playing the game, you don't want to be messing about too much. So I think getting that nice kind of consistent colour scheme was a good idea for these ones. So it's a case of going around on these ones. They've got the head crests, and they've got kind of fin bits on their forearms and their tails. I think we've got some on their calves as well. So yeah, getting those bits done nice and neatly. Because this is opaque, this one does go over the turquoise. If you've overgone a little bit with the turquoise onto bits you don't want, this red goes over that quite well because it is so vibrant. But you know, mostly I'd kept things nice and neat anyway, so it wasn't a problem. So just carefully going over those bits there in red. I used snakebite leather contrast paint for the loincloths and the little bracelety armband things, and also the weapon hafts. I mean, I considered using different browns for that, but to be honest, I just thought keep it simple, small number of colours on the palette, and just get it done really. And it looks fine. You've got the different kind of textures, so that works quite nicely. And snakebite leather is a really nice colour. I remember good old snakebite leather from the old days of the hexagonal bottles. Used to use that a lot. But yeah, the new contrast paint snakebite leather, that works nicely as well. I think there's something to be said for having a limited palette on the models as well, especially for a game like this. When I was younger, I used to just try and put every single colour on all the models, and it took ages, and I don't think it really added all that much. But, you know, that's age and experience, I suppose. But yeah, happy with those. And then it was on to doing the details. Now, this is one of my favourite guys in the set. He's holding a fish. And obviously, like I said, you can put the different hands on different places, so you could have had the fish being held down or held up. There's a big chunk taken out of the fish on its dorsal side, which you can't see from this angle. But I thought just having an abomination running around hitting the heroes with a fish, brilliant. That feels very apt for Heroquest. I used Pilar Glacier for this, which is an interesting colour. Put it on just straight out of the bottle. It does look a bit weird when you put it on. It doesn't look like it's sitting right at all. It behaves very differently to all the other paints. But then once it dries, it just gives this kind of like subtle bluish grey colour, which I thought was pretty spot on for a dead fish. In other aquatic weaponry, a couple of the Sahagin have got turtle shields, which I thought was pretty cool. I decided to paint them both green using orc flesh, because nice dark green. Again, I thought about doing something a bit more complicated. I thought about doing red shields, kind of a Mario style sort of thing, but I thought I've already got the red on their crests, it would not look very good doing that. And I thought about doing something a bit more complicated with the shells, because when you look at turtles, they've actually got a bit of sort of mottling or different colours or whatever. And I had the same thought when it came to the fish. You know, do I want to paint a different colour on the belly and the fins and all that kind of stuff? But I decided, you know what, I'm just going to paint them green. It's just a turtle shield. That'll do. And I think it looks absolutely fine. So I did that, and then the sort of inner lining of the shield and the edge of it I did with Cygor brown, which is a really, really dark brown. That's another one of those contrast paints with a huge amount of pigment in it, very, very opaque. But looks good for that sort of thing. When it came to the other weapons, I used a nice light silver, Ironbreaker silver, because I wanted it to be, you know, quite light. And then for some of them, I coated them after that in Cryptek Armor Shade Gloss, which has been discontinued. and I don't understand why, because it's fantastic. It gives us really nice kind of ancient bronzy sheen to the silver. So I wanted them to look like these Abominations had some ancient old things they'd dredged up from the bottom of the ocean that they were using. So I thought that looked pretty cool. And then it was a case of using Volupus pink, Volupus, however you say that. Pronunciation's a problem in this video, apparently. Anyway, the pink contrast on the tongue, and then all the gums where they're exposed, and the inside of the mouth. I wasn't worried about going over the teeth because I was planning to paint the teeth later on, which is what I did. I used the Wraithbone paint to paint the teeth and the eyes, so that I could then use Imperial Fist's yellow on the eyes to get a nice kind of bright yellow eye showing through, and then use Skeleton Horde on the teeth and claws once they'd been painted with the Wraithbone. So that was basically the models finished, and you can leave it there because you've got a lot of contrast and shade and highlights from the contrast paints, and they look pretty good as they are. But I also like to put a wash over these models just to get a bit more definition in there, and I think it ties them all together really nicely. So after doing the bases in Basilicanum Grey, which is what I've been doing for these flagstone bases to start with, I washed the entirety of the models with Army Painter Strong Tone, which is my favourite go-to wash. You can certainly do washes over certain areas of models if you want to use a specific red wash on the red paint and all that kind of stuff, and that can look really good if you're trying to get a real high quality paint job. But the Strong Tone Quick Shade I find just works over most colours, and if you slap it on the whole model, you can use just a big wash brush. It doesn't take very long. It takes quite a while to dry, especially because I tend to thin it down almost 1-to-1 with water, so it really flows into all the crevices and all that. And I think that it kind of ties everything together in quite a nice way. It gives a really good effect in the end. And then it was a case of dry brushing the bases. So after using the Basilicanum Grey, it's a little bit blotchy, especially on the flat bits. So I dry brushed with some Dawnstone on top of that. And then after the wash, I dry brushed the base again with a bit of Grey Sear, actually, which is the other contrast base colour, but it's quite a nice light grey in its own right. So you don't have to use it just as a base colour, you can use it for other things. So I use that to dry brush over the flagstones just to get a bit more sort of pop in there, make them a little bit brighter. My whole plan with these flagstone bases is so they kind of look like the corridors on the Heroquest board, so they're kind of a fairly light grey stone. But the combination of putting the wash in there and the Basilicanum Grey, you get a lot of depth to the shadows. Potentially, you don't need quite so many steps on the bases. I've done more steps on the bases than the rest of the model, really. But I think it looks cool. And that's it, really. Then it's a black base rim and all done. Oh, I did put some little pupils on. I normally don't bother putting pupils in eyes, but for these, I thought just a little line for the a kind of vertical pupil would look really good. So I did put the effort into to do that on these ones. And that's it. And I think they look really, really effective. I'm very happy with these. They're going to look great on the tabletop. I'm looking forward to using them in the next Heroquest game that we've got, which we're going to have quite soon, hopefully. Yeah, there's going to be a few more videos popping up very soon of painting some more bits and pieces, because I've been finally able to get some proper time dedicated to getting these models painted up. So come back for another video. If you like this one, like and subscribe. There'll be some links below for where you can get the STLs, what paints I've used. You go to Element Games and get the paints from there. You always get a good price from Element Games. Yeah, like to see you back for the next one. Hope you enjoyed it. Right, cheers then. Goodbye.